We are creatures of desire. What we most desire is meaning. What makes us suffer most is a lack of meaning.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Marital therapist, author, and communications trainer Andrew G. Marshall invites guests from all walks of life to discuss what makes life meaningful.
Hello, I'm Andrew G. Marshall. Welcome to The Meaningful Life. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and wherever you find your podcasts. What is your relationship like with food? Each year, 2 out of 3 of us go on a diet, but 95% of diets are not successful. Whether you're looking at what you eat to lose weight or because your doctor has drawn the attention to the link between your diet and your health, the problem is that food is never just food. It can stand in for love, for comfort, reward. It can bust stress. I could go on forever. My witness today is Dr Pam Spurr, who is a broadcaster and a chartered academic, research and teaching psychologist at the British Psychological Society. Pam obtained her doctorate in psychology at Guy's Hospital, specifically in the field of young children and family function. She completed the Parent Advisor Counselling course at Guy's, as well as a PTSD course. She is the author of 15 self-help titles, including The Emotional Eater's Diet, How to Understand Your Emotions and Become a Healthy Weight for Life. She has also written her first children's book, Eva the Bear and the Magic Snowflake, which she created out of bedtime stories that she's been telling her 3 granddaughters. So, Pam, what made you decide to write about emotional eating?
Well, I have worked as a life coach privately for many years. And I often found, as a coach versus, say, a counselor, coaching, we tend to take a more easily definable issue. Maybe someone is finding it hard to communicate with their line manager at work and they just want to buff up their communication skills, or maybe they want confidence before their wedding because they do not like really being in front of people. So coaching, as I say, is quite, got a limited sort of arena compared to counseling, where you may go much more in depth with someone and the challenges they're facing. I found in my coaching practice, just randomly, so many people would say, oh my gosh, I hit the biscuits last night, or, oh, I ate a ton of chocolate because this really stressed me out worrying about my wedding, and that's the last thing I want to do before my wedding, eating comfort food. And so this theme kept arising. So I started researching it. And I looked at all the international research. And in my book, I cited over 50 pieces of well-done and well-structured research into dieting and emotional eating. And just felt it was a topic that affects so many people, Andrew. And it's also something that begins in childhood. Let's take 2 simple examples. Let's say you have a mother or father who comfort ate. So they get back from their stressful day. You've come home from school and you watch mom or dad pile the food in and they go, oh my goodness, I was so stressed today. Okay, now let's think about tea time. So you've already watched this behavior. So that's one way that we kind of learn these kind of behaviors, that that's the way you comfort yourself. But another way is much more subtle, Andrew. Take the parent whose child falls off their trike at age 4, skins their knee, and mum or dad says, oh, don't worry, I've got a chocolate in my bag. Here you go, or here's a lolly, or let's go to the shop and buy a lolly for you or something. And they use food to comfort normal, sort of feelings of pain or hurt or shock when a child falls off their tricycle or something, rather than giving a big cuddle and saying, oh my goodness, that was a shock, wasn't it? It's always a shock when you do something like that. But when you're feeling better, you can go back on your trike. There's just 2 ways. There are many ways that parents transmit their relationship with food to a child. So often we look back into how, what recollections someone has. And they'll often say things like, yes, if I had bad exam result, mum would say, let's go and get some cream buns or something, and kind of use food to soothe rather than using communication. And Andrew, I know you're big on communication.
Yeah, and we celebrate with food, don't we? I mean, I can't think of any event where there isn't a good meal afterwards. Births, weddings and funerals, we all get out the food. Birthdays, I mean, it's impossible not to celebrate with food.
You're absolutely right. There's a difference between celebrating with food when it is an established event, as you say, a wedding, maybe a baby christening, a religious event. We use that, we come together and we celebrate together. And that is a very different sort of use of food than using it to soothe discomfort. So I always say to people, because people often ask me that question, they go, yeah, but what about celebratory food? And I go, but that is for that celebration, that's for that date. Everybody knows what's happening. We're socializing, we're happy, and we're tasting delicious food together. So that doesn't tend to be the root of an emotional eating problem. Although, if your family was the sort who were celebrating every weekend, let's celebrate this, let's celebrate that, and they just get out loads of comfort food.
Thank goodness it's Friday.
Yeah, exactly. That's not a true celebration, as you were implying. That is slipping down into making it a regular event.
So what is your relationship with food like?
Well, I was never an emotional eater until I went through I got married very young. I had children very young. I was an unmarried university student when I had my oldest. I then eventually married his father, and we had a second child. But already during my pregnancy, our marriage was very difficult. And once I had my second child, I started emotionally eating because I was so distressed. I was very young. I was 23. My first husband was much older, very dominating and controlling. And I comfort ate. And then at some point, probably a year after, into this sort of time, I realized what I was doing. And I realized I actually needed to communicate my pain, Andrew, communicate it with friends and family, and learn how to cope better. I did have to divorce him. But I overcame that phase of emotional eating by realizing the true nature of my problem. I was frightened to tell people how bad things were. And it's interesting, Andrew, I'm sure this will resonate with your work. I often have, people say things like, I just went through this bad time and then it became a habit comforting myself. And it may be some other method that they're comforting themselves, alcohol or drugs or whatever, but it can be just as addictive as comfort eating can become very addictive, all the chemicals in fast food. And, people often say, I thought it was just a phase, but then it became a habit. I never talked about it, and I just kept eating. And it's that communication. So many people I've coached who have told me things like they use comfort food. They find it hard to express their needs. So they shut down their needs and they feed their feelings instead of fueling their energy needs with food, which is what we should use food.
So the question always to ask yourself is, what is the feeling trying to tell me, rather than trying to shut it down with food?
100%. That is exactly it. And once you can get an emotional eater thinking about potentially how they're using food instead of communicating, and their fear, because so often, Andrew, they'll say something like, oh, but I fear being rejected by my partner if I actually tell them what I'm thinking about, like this aspect of our relationship. Or I fear talking to my boss about that. Or I feel anxious telling my mum, that she's just interfering with my life. I'm a grown-up now, too much. Yeah, and they fear rejection. And once people get their heads around this and learn how to communicate these worries and fears and anxieties and understand those, you can move away from the pattern of emotional eating and gain that relief, that confidence, that bit of self-esteem that I am going to talk about this. I am going to learn good methods to actually express myself.
I'm wondering, and I'm going to float this idea past you, is that we all have a complicated relationship with food. This is a confession time. I've had to change my diet because apparently going past 60 can have a huge impact on your blood pressure. So although I don't smoke and I do a reasonable amount of exercise and, I have a good enough diet, I have high blood pressure and I've got to cut out caffeine, reduce salt, so no crisps or crackers, which are two of my favorite things in the world. And I've become much more aware of my relationship to food. Now, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think awareness is great. Obviously, people can become obsessed with their awareness if they've kind of got an obsessive trait or side to their personality. They can start overthinking it. And it's really tricky because awareness is great. You're now aware of the things that you really shouldn't eat. And hopefully you're seeing a reduction in your high blood pressure. And that can be a reward in itself. As you learn, I've developed better and healthier eating habits. I'm using food as fuel for my energy and not to feed my feelings. That's a great step. But where, as you highlight, it can go wrong when you start obsessing about every single thing you eat. That is not good because, again, that becomes almost, disordered thinking. So almost a different type of eating disorder. If you are obsessing about every calorie, every ounce, everything, is it, organic or has it come from a reliable source? And if you start obsessing about everything, then again, it's not a healthy way to relate to food.
So we're going to look at the different types of emotional eating. I've pulled out a few strands, using it to deal with negative emotions.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So if you are angry, let's say with your partner, at work, with your best friend, with your family, acting on those angry, negative emotions with food gives a kind of almost instant relief. Because if you're using processed foods with all those chemicals, the companies are very wise. They put the sugars, the salts in, the things that give us a little bit of a brain hit, alter our brain chemistry. And then you feel a bit better temporarily. And then that becomes your solution because you've been angry, but it kind of calms you down because you get that little bit of dopamine hit, that new reward pathway you're setting in your brain. When I'm angry, okay, I feel better when I buy my favorite packet of biscuits and I do feel better. But you're not helping yourself.
And some of these people might not even think that they're actually being angry. They're so good at actually shutting it down with food, they think I'm hungry rather than I'm angry. Am I getting that right?
That's a really important point because, yes, we can become so in denial of our feelings, and that includes anger. And anger is an important feeling, and we need to embrace any major feeling that we have like that, any major emotion. And when you embrace it and go, I know I'm angry. Okay, once I calm down, what am I going to do about this situation? Instead, it becomes a habit. Oh, I feel angry, or I don't even realize I feel angry, but you've left work and you're kind of stewing along as you go to the tube or to get your train or whatever. Stop in the shop, buy those biscuits. It becomes a habit. All of our lives, Andrew, are based around habitual ways of doing things. We couldn't get out the door if we didn't have our breakfast habit routine established. Those are good. Those are helpful, habitual routines that make life more smooth. But it's not helpful when it becomes a habit of you're angry about something. You don't even recognize your anger. You just go into automatic habitual mode. I'm stopping at the newsagent next to the tube station. I'm buying those biscuits.
I think I'll have the packet of crisps if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm buying that big bag of crisps.
Now, it can also be a positive emotions type of emotional eating. How does that work?
Well, again, that's kind of about that when something good happens, we want to celebrate. So let's say we get that promotion at work and you say to your best mate at work, let's go out to the pub, let's go to lunch, let's have I really fancy some sausage and mash. Well, that's great. One plate of sausage and mash is not going to ruin you. People might say, oh, the butter and the mash and the sausages are greasy and they've got a lot of chemicals in them, whatever. But, that kind of sense of I'm happy and I'm going to eat often is related to situational events. So something great. Like I just got a new kitten last week, so I'm very happy. And I could have, if I'm an emotional eater, just opened a big box of chocolates and sat there eating my chocolates, watching my kitten play. So again, it's great that you're pointing out that sometimes we can get into bad habits, even if it's from a happy place.
And what about sadness? Because I think that sadness and food are very connected. I mean, back to the funeral, there is sort of, after you've been through a funeral, there is just this huge desire to have something to eat to prove that you're alive. So I do think that food can help us in a negative kind of way, with sadness.
Well, again, that so many people who are sad often end up not eating enough, not nourishing themselves because they are too sad and depressed not to. But on the other hand, as you say, there are those who are feeling sad. It can be reactive to a bereavement, to a divorce, to something going on at work. You're in debt. That sadness, again, you can feed that to the cows come home with food. But unless you actually say, allow yourself to grieve, if it's a reaction to bereavement, allow yourself. I always say, we don't allow ourselves to just breathe for a moment and think. These feelings, I'm going to roll with them. As I say, I use that term, embrace them. I'm going to embrace this sadness. I have every right to be sad. I've lost my partner. I've lost my mother, or whatever it is. And then only start to recognize if you are dipping in to food in those moments where you're feeling extremely sad. Because that is not the healthy way to deal with sadness. You have to eat. You do not want to be the person who goes to the extreme where they're so sad and devastated and bereaved that they do not eat, because that's a whole different kettle of fish.
So when does it become disordered eating then?
When it becomes a habit. Because if you, let's take someone who's lost their job. And so they start binge eating at night. They're eating chips. They're just feeling horrible about themselves. You might do that for a few nights until you think, actually, this is not the way to deal with this loss. I'm going to have to process the feelings I have, these horrible feelings that I've been rejected, I've lost my job, I wasn't good enough. I'm going to have to deal with those feelings. I'm going to have to ask friends, family, whatever, to support me. But I can't carry on just sitting or all day if you've lost your job, and just binging on those things that give you that temporary hit. Because it's always about recognizing before it becomes disordered and a habit. And you can stop these things from becoming a habit, but only if you're listening to your feelings and communicating about them. The C word is crucial.
So how do you break the habit?
Well, it's interesting. I like to look, when I'm coaching someone, at the macro level and the micro level. So at the macro level, the big picture of their life level, you look at ways of boosting confidence, boosting self-esteem, general things that will help them. It may be that they take up the hobby that they stopped a few years ago because they just felt they didn't have time. It may be that they get out and start getting exercise and actually start feeling better about themselves. It may be they need some mantras that they, put Post-it notes on their mirror and on their desk that say, remind yourself you're good, you can do it.
I sort of try and remind myself I'm somebody who no longer eats crisps.
That will be your Post-it note. No crisps. And then, once you're working on the macro level, not thinking about food, just your general well-being, you also look at the micro level. This is where it can get really interesting. There is so much research, and so much of it I quoted in my book. Things like when you're sad, or when you're stressed, when you're angry, you get home at night, you have your meal, then you go to the sofa to watch some telly, and you bring the whole bag of crisps. And what happens is you don't even realize, because it's become a habit, you're just eating, and then suddenly the bag is end. And it was a sharing bag. It was a family-sized bag. So what you should have done, and what people need to learn to do, is never eat in front of the TV without portion control. So if someone puts a cup of crisps and takes it to the TV room, they've been a bit stressed, and they go, this is my treat. I'm aware that this is what I'm going to eat. It's that awareness, creating awareness. Same with things like leftovers. Really practical things. The families come for Sunday lunch. There's a big thing of leftover roast chicken and roast potatoes. Don't leave it sitting there in front of you, because every time you walk past it, you just pick at it when you're stressed, angry, sad, whatever. You actually learn, do practical things like put leftovers in the fridge out of sight. Things like smaller plate size. When you're learning portion control and not loading up one of those huge, great dinner plates that, some people now, they're larger. I don't know if you've seen them. They're very large dinner plates. You can buy it on, outlets. Slightly smaller plate size. You put on less. You can't, because otherwise you visually see how much is falling over the edges. So getting really super practical. We all know this. Never do the food shop when you're hungry, because you will grab the hot dogs they've got there at the deli counter all ready to eat. You will grab that extra packet of biscuits, that chocolate bar, a bag of crisps that you don't need. So you always shop when you're sated, after breakfast, after lunch. Shops are now open late, after dinner. You take your shopping list. You stick to your list. You don't get entranced by the bog-offs of your favorite biscuit. It's like, buy one pack and you get 3 more free. You steer clear of anything that's not on your list. All these sort of practical things, the micro level of breaking habits that are crucial.
Now, I think a lot of people discover that they've got problems with food through their children. Particularly teenage girls are very sensitive about food. And I think a lot of mothers discover that the relationship between your daughter and you is not about what you tell them, but actually how you've been acting. And they've actually watched you and they've learnt all these things about food through you.
Oh, 100%. And you get the one extreme of the mother or father who always, here's the solution. Your teenage daughter had a bad day and felt bullied at school. You give her, I bought your favorite chocolate bar on my way home from work. To the other, where you yourself, as I said earlier, you are using food for your stress. So your daughter may be telling you about their bad feelings they had that day at school. They felt rejected by a friend, or they felt bullied, or whatever. And you get out the packet of biscuits and you're eating because you have this almost unconscious habit. So when you get in a stress situation yourself and you're worried about your daughter, let's say, you revert to type. She sees that. And so it's just not good for either of you. So what you need to always be aware of when your child, and it can be a teenage daughter or your teenage son, we have more boys who have disordered eating now. When they're upset, you do not make it about food. You never make it. You make it about you are there with them. You are there willing to listen to what they have to say. And they can count on you. And even if you don't have the exact advice you think that you should probably have the best advice in the world for them, just being there for them and comforting them means they don't need comfort food.
I mean, I would say please don't try and give them advice. I think what they need more than anything else is to be listened to. I mean, if they ask for advice, that's something entirely different.
I totally agree. And I think parents get bogged down by thinking, I don't have good advice. But it's just crucial that you are there for them. And they know they can tell you that their deepest, darkest feelings, things that trouble them. That's how you create a healthy relationship between you generally, and you do not bring food into the equation.
Do you think it's actually worth talking to your children about your own relationship with food and owning it, or is that putting your stuff onto them?
I think with older teens, if they say to you something like, Mom, I always see you, you always open those biscuits when you get home from work, or I see you always have an extra glass of wine when you're stressed, taking it in a slightly different road. You have to absolutely acknowledge, you have to say, you are right. And I need to work on that. I need to work on my stress. I don't think younger children would bring it up. And again, with younger children, we try and keep our own issues away from them. Younger children need as much of the kind of stress-free from adult living that we can provide for them. But as children get older, they notice these things. And that's a really good point, Andrew. when your older child confronts you, you need to own it and talk about it and communicate. Because once again, we come back to that communication.
And what if it's sort of affecting your body image?
I think bringing body image in with your teenage children is not a really good idea. Body image, issues, body dysmorphia, fears that you're too fat, those kind of things. Talking about the fact that maybe you're using food inappropriately and you need to deal with that is a good talking point with children. But burdening them with deeper worries, I think on the whole, I still feel adolescents need more of them revealing their inner issues than you giving them to them, your issues to them. Only because some teenagers will feel overburdened. They are then worried about mom or dad. But if you actually say in a very straightforward way, you're absolutely right. You have seen me have biscuits when I come in stressed. You have seen me open a big chocolate bar when I'm cooking dinner. You are right, and I do need to deal with my stress better. That is a totally different kettle of fish than then going on to say, I've always struggled with my body image. This has just been a real problem. They are not your therapist. But that's my personal feeling. Other people...
I'm agreeing with you, but I'm sort of thinking on it much more, for my listener, who I'm imagining is the parent, that actually they've always had body image issues, and maybe their teenage children are actually throwing those up into stark relief because you're sort of seeing a mini-me version of it. So what should you do for yourself?
Well, again, for yourself, you have to start being aware because of this habitual way that we start using food, from our habit of how we have our breakfast, which hopefully is the meal that sets you up for the day. I know a lot of people just grab like those breakfast biscuits, things like that on the run. They don't set up the day. Then you need to address that. Because again, if you have children in the house, they will be watching how you do your breakfast. Even if you're giving them their breakfast, let's say a good bit of toast with a peanut butter on it or a porridge or whatever, if you are also not partaking in a healthy breakfast to set you up for the day, they will notice that. And they may start taking on a view that, well, mom or dad doesn't have a proper breakfast. I'm in a hurry. I don't want that porridge today or whatever. So you can impact your children in so many ways like that, where you don't even realize you're impacting them. But one day they take note. You don't eat breakfast. Why do I have to? I don't feel like breakfast today, mum or dad.
So what did you have for breakfast today then?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, I always have the same thing. I'm a firm believer in breakfast. I have porridge with dark berries. So whatever dark berries there are in the local market, blueberries, boysenberries, blackberries. And then I have dried mango and dried apricot. And then it's my only coffee of the day. I have one beautiful, delicious big mug of coffee. And then I'm caffeine free the rest of the day.
All right. I have a big bowl of fresh fruit with porridge and yogurt as well.
Very similar.
So in a moment, we're going to talk about a letter that's been written in to me. And we're also going to look at the new book that Pam has written for her grandchildren.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material and other benefits.
Guess how long I've been helping couples have more fulfilling relationships? The answer shocked me. 39 years. Over this time, I've developed all sorts of interventions to help couples communicate better and make meaningful changes to protect and nurture their love. Some ideas I've used for a while and dropped, but at the core, there are a handful of must-haves that I use with all the couples I see face to face. Sadly, I can't work with everyone who wants my help, but I can share my best relationship tools. I put them in a new course with worksheets and links to my most helpful podcasts. There are 4 hours of instructions to do at your pace together, with your partner or on your own. and it normally retails at £150. But to launch, I've dropped them to a special introductory price of £99.50. If you'd like to find out more, go to andrewgmarshall.com/tools and get started on improving your relationship.
It's important to properly dispose of unwanted medication or sharps. MedProject offers free and convenient disposal options near you. To learn more, call 844-MED-PROJECT or visit medproject.org.
As a roofer, spring means the start of my busy season, which means I've got to get organized with help from Beacon. I can save time with Beacon Pro Plus and 24/7 access to live pricing, delivery tracking, order history, and more. Plus, this spring, I can earn $1,000 and the chance to win a $25,000 backyard renovation just by buying my CertainTeed shingles online with Beacon. No purchase necessary. Now that's what I call a spring cleanup. Visit BECN.com for official rules and to start earning entries.
If you'd like to participate in the program, you can go to my website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcasts. You'll find a place there where you can participate in the program. You can also sign up for my newsletter as well. And here's a letter that I've been sent. How do I get my husband to cooperate? I've tried asking nicely. I've tried telling him how much it hurts when I'm left to do the lion's share of everything, but nothing works beyond when I explode. The situation has got worse since we had our daughter, who is now 3, and I'm under even more pressure. He says he's doing his best, but he can never get through my list or complete tasks to my satisfaction. When I get angry, he seethes inside or ignores me. Nothing gets solved, and if I push to talk, normally after 3 or 4 days of freeze, we end up screaming at each other. It is draining all the love out of our marriage. I don't know what to do for the best. Is there any hope?
Well, my goodness, I can understand how that's draining, the love and life out of a marriage, especially as she mentions that after they had their child 3 years ago. So this has been going on before that, because she said it got worse. This has become, and I'm going to use this word again, a habitual way of relating to each other. They are trapped in a negative cycle of arguing that they both understand, they both know happens, and they don't know how to get out of it because it's become a habit. And 2 things struck me where she says that he can't meet her expectations. So we need to talk expectations. And also the fact that this is habitual and that they both need to agree. I mean, Andrew, I think the starting point would be agreeing, a sort of ground zero to start from, agreeing that they go through this same cycle, and they've done so for 4 years, maybe a bit longer. So if both of them can agree a ground zero, and they start afresh by talking about things like why they first fell in love with each other, what traits, what good qualities did they see in each other, and then they move that on to what good skills and qualities do each of us have to offer the management of our household? What do we each do best? Because I often feel that couples are not prepared to look at, well, actually, he does that better, and actually, she does that better. And so that should be in their realm. Or if it's the same sex union, he does that better, and he does that other stuff better. So whatever the dynamic. And then you have to look at your expectations. So just from her letter, it sounds like he feels she has very high expectations for how household tasks should be done. And maybe once they've agreed to look at why they fell in love and the good qualities they each have, and then look at those good qualities in the present, what good skills and qualities do we each have to offer? How can we break down the household management between them? And how can we manage our differing expectations? Andrew, don't you think it's important that people understand what his expectations may be for what an ordered and a clean enough household may be are different from hers? And they each are going to have to give a little. And once they recognize who does things best and kind of start breaking up household management into those areas. And then also, what's our expectation? Is it going to be dust-free and highly polished? Or is it going to be fine? It's going to be what I call my household. I'm not obsessed with everything being dust-free and shiny, shiny. Is it going to be okay? Because what's most important, why we fell in love, the good qualities we still have with each other, and we are going to start seeing those good qualities again and break this cycle. It takes work, though, doesn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, I love your idea of a ground zero, because I think the problem is every time you try and talk about this, you're talking about it on the back of a particular episode, and you're going to have an opinion about why you're right and your partner is wrong.
100%.
And you're going to have lots of reasons why you're right, and he's going to have lots of reasons why you're wrong. And you're never going to settle anything by trying to somehow decide, who's in the right and who's in the wrong, however deeply you actually want to do that.
Yeah. You have to extricate yourself from the blame game. The blame game and finger pointing where you just didn't do that. Those windows should look better. Or, the way you washed up, the way you stacked the dishwasher, it should be better. That finger pointing can be incredibly destructive. And we often don't even realize we're doing it. That blame game. And that's why I say you've got to stand back from that, refresh. Relationship research shows that people who take that stroll down memory lane regularly, so maybe once a month, they're out on a Sunday walk and they go, when we first met, and I just loved that so much about you. And remember our first holiday, and we had such fun. And do you remember our first flat that we rented? And, this happened and that happened. When you start getting that good feeling that there was a foundation for why you got married and why you had a child, and that you're prepared to undo this habitual cycle that you're both locked into, you can make progress, but you need to work at it.
And I think you need empathy and curiosity. So empathy, in my experience, people who have high expectations normally have high expectations of other people because they've got even way higher expectations of themselves. And they've got a really cruel taskmaster inside themselves. And, that's really difficult. So the empathy is, it must be hard to be trying to be perfect and a parent. I mean, that's a pretty thankless and impossible task. Where is that coming from? And over the other side, I'm hearing possibly with the man being hyper aware of criticism. So it might be better to put a jacket on our daughter son, whatever, before you take him out because, there's ice on the cars outside. It's very easy to hear that if you're very sensitive to criticism as, you stupid person, don't you know how to look after our daughter?
Exactly. And when you're talking about your expectations, and then you're talking about how you fulfill them, and do you fill them with that inner, that critical voice that you, as you say, someone with high expectations of others, even often have higher of themselves. So you're using that critical voice within yourself, but also on your partner.
Well, I think that for her partner, he probably has a sensitivity to criticism that is actually came around before she even met him, because possibly he had a critical parent himself, and we've got a whole load of old material there. So I think if you can begin to have empathy for each other, because you're both right, possibly she does have too high standards, and possibly he's wrong as well, because he's probably hypersensitive to criticism. And if we can actually begin to understand that picture and talk about it, we can perhaps begin to break this cycle. But this I'm right, who's wrong, we're never going to break that one.
Well, it's such a good point you make. And I think when you look at relationship research, how people often marry the person that reminds them of their significant parent. So if they had a hypercritical, the main parent, say the mother was hypercritical, and then they still seek out because they know that role, and then they seek out a partner who's hypercritical. Because we spoke earlier about denial, you're kind of in denial. It's something you know and in a way feel comfortable with, but you still end up making each other feel miserable as per the letter. So it's really interesting dynamics when people start looking at well, what was my role model? And actually, you are my role model. I've married someone like my mother, let's say, and she's married someone maybe like her father, who her father used to complain about being the henpecked husband, as men in the 60s or 70s would say. They would use that, So then you two have to say, well, we were attracted to each other. We did love each other, and we did see each other's good qualities, but we've fallen into type. We've fallen into this habitual way of relating.
And I think there's a very good tip that I give is you have a decision of who's in charge of this particular task. So back to my example of getting the child out to playgroup or whatever in the morning. If parent A is in charge, parent B is not allowed to make comments from the sidelines. I mean, if they're seeing something that they really have got problems with, they can talk about it in the evening later, but you cannot have a situation where you're actually critiquing each other's version of parenting as you're going along with, you're not going to do something so terrible. If you take the child out and they're cold, you can actually come back in again and get a coat. The world is not going to end. I mean, obviously, if they're about to, put their hand in the plug and the other one hasn't noticed it, that might be an exception, but it really has to be a proper emergency. That who's in charge and, you're handing over the responsibility. I think that can help a huge amount.
Yeah, absolutely. That utterly chimes with what I said about when people start looking, well, what actually do I do better? And maybe one of them is better at getting, a reluctant child who doesn't want to go to school. Let's take a slightly older child. One of you is actually better about talking to them and giving them that little extra pep talk and getting them out the door than the other. And the cleaning test. And if you have a garden, and the gardening test, you look at each other's qualities and you then delegate appropriately rather than saying, I want you to do that just because I don't want to do it today. Let's say she hates washing the floors and she thinks he can do a better job, but he never does a job to her standard. Well, then you need to claim responsibility for it. If you want the high expectations to be actually played out, then you need to do it yourself because actually you'd be better at doing that. So it is just about recognizing these things. And we know life is so complicated, Andrew, that people will stay in these cycles for years of arguing because they just don't take the time to stand back, pull the things apart, look at the best qualities they have, and bring solutions to the table rather than complaints.
So I'm thinking now about your children's book because all of these problems often go all the way back to our childhood. And the messages we get in our childhood are incredibly important.
Oh, my goodness. They are utterly important. Particularly the first 5 years of life. Your child learns so much about the world from you, as well as, let's say, cognitively developing. Those first 5 years are crucial for their cognitive development. But their way of relating to the world is wholly dependent pretty much on you and, say, nursery care, the care they get if you're working parents.
So tell us about that very special time where you're sitting down, or in fact, probably they're lying down and you're sitting beside the bed and you're telling a story to a child. I mean, it's an archetypal moment. Why is it so important?
It's so important for, you end the day on a loving note. When my first granddaughter was born just over 7 years ago, I started writing little stories and making up little stories for her. And, from an early, you get the baby books with just the little pictures in them. And then you start getting books with words. And by the time she was 2, I'd written a story for her and I used to tell her it and she would really enjoy it. And she asked me for another. And then my next granddaughter came along. She's, just over 4.5 years ago. And I started writing stories for her. And the storybook that got published, Eva the Bear and the Magic Snowflake, is actually one of the ones I wrote for her. The third granddaughter arrived too. She was 2.5 now, and I've written stories for her. When my agent started pitching, funny enough, he started pitching stories 5 years ago, even before the birth of my second granddaughter that this book is based on. Finally found a publisher for me just over 1.5 years ago who would buy the story because most of the publishers said, Pam is known for adult self-help. It's going to be very hard in a very competitive, crowded children's market to find a place for her. So it was no. Perseverance pays off. He finally, about the 13th publisher, found one to buy it. And Eva the Bear and the Magic Snowflake is about a rambunctious young bear and her family of bears. And Eva is the type of bear who she strikes off in a snowstorm when she knows she probably shouldn't. And she gets into real trouble in the snowstorm. And with her own courage and with a little bit of magic from the Magic Snowflake, she believes she can do it. And she's buried in snow and she climbs out of the snow. And she starts putting one paw in front of the other to finally get back to her family. And so it's a story about children finding courage, or in the shape of a bear, children find courage and your resilience, and that there's a little bit of magic in everyone. And we've got it, And funny enough, Eva, my granddaughter, her nickname is the Bear because from about 6 months, she was full of gusto, hurtling herself. She passed the crawling stage. And so we always called her Eva the Bear. And then this is the story that got chosen by the publisher because they were given about 7 stories to choose from, and they chose this one to go with. That's how it all happened. I tell the other my older granddaughter, don't worry, one day I'll get one of your stories published. The younger granddaughter's too young to care.
Well, I think it's fascinating because I often use fairy tales and stories with my clients, and we sort of go and look at the underlying wisdom in the story, because the classic tales, the Grimm's brothers' tales, have been passed down from the beginning of time. So I look at it as the collective wisdom of our ancestors, because here in Germany, they just call we call them fairy tales. Here in Germany, where I live, they call them the Märchen, which just means the tales, because they're not just for children, they're for everybody. And it seems to me the central message of all stories, for every story actually, but particularly the stories we tell children, is the same message that you have, which is be brave and keep going.
Yes, which is an important message for life. It's crucial that children learn that they do have resilience, that they're not totally mollycoddled, that they can, be brave. And of course, some children are more shy than others. And we always have to shape our expectations around our own children, or in my case, our grandchildren. And we have to let them find their safe spaces and what they like doing. And then we need to nudge them a little bit further and just help them discover more about what they can actually do in this huge world. Open doors. That's what I think stories do for children. It opens up their mind.
And actually, the topic we started talking about, which is emotional eating, we have to be brave and keep going. We have to feel the feeling and see what it's trying to tell us. And we can, in that way, undo the emotional eating habit.
Absolutely. And it is about facing the truth and realizing what you can do to help with difficult feelings. And as we have said, you need to be able to reach out. You need to tell people, trusted friend, family, partner, I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with what happened at work. I'm struggling, I lost that friendship. We had a big argument. I'm really struggling. And I've just been attacking, I've been getting chips out of the freezer every night. And I don't want to do that. I want to talk about it. I want to know I can get through this. And you do yourself a huge favor by actually learning to find the language that works for you to talk about these things.
So, as a witness on The Meaningful Life, I need to ask you, what makes your life meaningful?
What makes my life meaningful is my family. I grew up in a family-oriented family, a large family. We often talk about celebrating, we all would have big birthday parties. We would all celebrate, Christmas and Thanksgiving, because I was raised in America until I was 16. It was very full of life and energy, and our parents were very encouraging. And that's what I've tried with my family, even though I divorced, my first husband when I was very young, but then remarried 28 years ago. And we are all about family and friendship, good friends, the friends who come into our family. We kind of have this almost castle-like thing around our family. And then when we make good friends, they get to come in and, we have great fun, parties and get-togethers, and that makes my life more meaningful than anything. Yes, I love my work. Yes, I love writing. I love painting. I retook up painting 4 years ago. But nothing matters more than the connection in my family and friendship group.
So in a moment, we're going to move on to bonus material. The conversation doesn't end here. I'm going to be talking about another one of Pam's books, which actually sort of dovetails into this, 10 Essential Principles to Change Your Life. So we'll be talking about some of those principles in a moment. And if you want to hear the bonus material, you can subscribe directly via Apple and Spotify. And if you want to become a supporter of The Meaningful Life and unlock the bonus material this way, here are the details.
You've been listening to The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. You can follow Andrew on Twitter, like him on Facebook, and please leave a review wherever you consume your podcasts. Making, editing, and distributing The Meaningful Life comes with substantial costs, and we'd like to ask for your help. Visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material for every program, send in a letter to be discussed by Andrew and his guests, and join a community of other people seeking to make their life meaningful. At the gold level, you get even more benefits. Production of The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall is by Michael Dooney. Social media by Madeleine Healy. Sound engineering and theme tune by Sebastian de la Luz Mendoza. And I'm Susie Colick. Please tell your friends and spread the word. Thank you.
It's important to properly dispose of unwanted medication or sharps. MedProject offers free and convenient disposal options near you. To learn more, call 844-MED-PROJECT or visit medproject.org.